Hey everyone, let's get golf flexible. Today we're talking about it's all in the hips. One of my uh, favorite topics for golfers, just because I've seen it so many times that people are limited in some of these movements and it directly relates to their golf swing. Hi, my name's Dr. Andrew Dulac. I'm Titleist Performance Institute certified at the highest levels of power and medical, also certified in fitness, and my background is a physical therapist and previously as a personal trainer. I hope you get a lot out of this. And if you have any questions after this workshop, please email, text me, call me, and we'll discuss it. Thanks. What you'll learn today are the basic foundations of the hip, the A&P, anatomy and physiological movements of the body. The top three hip movements for golfers, these are the big three that I call them, that all golfers should have normal levels to get into the ideal positions. If you have any limitations and you can correct them, it will improve your golf swing. And I'll show you the number one tightness that causes the biggest swing faults to distance loss, inconsistency when you're striking the ball, and higher scores on each hole. Here's the basic foundation of the hip. The hip is a ball and socket joint. So when a ball and socket, it's very much like the shoulder. It has a lot of freedom to move. It can go forward and backwards. It can go side to side, and it also twists. So forward and backwards is called flexion and extension. Turning in and out, turning out is called external rotation. Turning in is internal rotation. And then abduction is all the way out, all the way in. I may throw these words in here so you can always reference this page specifically if some of the terminology that you're unclear with. So the one that I really want you to focus on is external rotation and internal rotation. So in this picture, the skeleton is showing external rotation where the foot is turning out and the upper thigh bone, the femur, is spinning outward. Vice versa, the internal rotation, the toes turning inward and the femur, the upper thigh bone, is turning in. So this is what we call open chain movements. When you're in the golf posture, so your foot is fixated, your thigh bone's not going to be rotating as much. But what is going to be rotating is the pelvis, the hip bones. So that changes a little bit. So if we place that foot down on the ground and turn the hips this way, the femur is actually technically turning out to the right. So that's still external rotation. I'll cover this later in more applicable setting looking at a golfer. Internal rotation would be when the pelvis turns into the right hip. The femur is technically moving inward, and that's what internal rotation. So that's the basic concepts. There's 6 freedoms of movements for the hip joint. It's a ball and socket. And along with this, we'll talk about the big 3 here shortly. So looking at the picture here of Tiger Woods, the backswing, transition, impact, follow through. So we're going to take a look at what the hips are doing in each of these movements. So the top 3 hip movements for right now, Tiger Woods. So if we go into the backswing, like I said before in the previous slide, the right foot is planted and the pelvis, the hips, are turning away. So the hip joint on the right side is actually turning internally, so internal rotation. It took me a couple years to really understand this because it looks like this would be external rotation because the hips are turning away, but that's not the case. It's turning into your femur, the upper thigh bone, and this is hip internal rotation. On the flip side, the lead hip, the left hip, is actually turning externally because the pelvis is turning away from the femur and the thigh bone is turning or staying put. And that's external rotation. So we have internal rotation, external rotation. I want to fast forward to impact, position, and follow through. The easiest way to look is the follow through is right here on the trail side. The belly button or the stomach and the chest are going towards your target. So is the pelvis going towards your target, but the leg is back a little bit, even though it released off the heel. This is hip extension. Hip extension, hip internal rotation, and external rotation are a couple things that we don't do in a normal day. Walking, your leg goes back a little bit, hip extension. When we put our shoes and socks on, we hip or externally rotate to get it crossing our legs, those kind of things. But hip internal rotation, we don't do a lot unless we're pivoting, turning right and left. So the big three, the top three movements of the golf swing: hip internal rotation, hip external rotation, and then hip extension. Those all have to be working together in order to get to the right positions. So what is the right position? How much movement do you need? Hip internal rotation is 35 to 45 degrees on your lead side. The lead side is basically the side that's closest to your target. So right-hand golfers, your left side is the lead side. The trail side would be the opposite. So for right-handers, it would be on the right side. So the lead hip has to internally rotate more than the trail side. So quite a bit too, about 10 to 15 degrees more. External rotation, they can be about the same, about 20 to 35 degrees. And then hip extension is about 10 degrees, mostly on the trail side. So let's go to this picture again. And hip internal rotation on this side should be 20 to 35 degrees. The hip external rotation should be about 20 to 35. Then at impact and follow through, I just like the follow through picture because we can see a lot more. The lead hip should be at least 35 to 45 degrees. The trail hip again should be about 20 to 35. And then hip extension should be about 10 degrees. These are the most important parts of the hips that I've seen with working with hundreds of golfers to get into the right positions. I'll talk about this a little later about how it plays into the golf swing. What is the number one tightness causing the swing faults? In all the golfers I've worked with, this has been the most common limitation that creates specific swing movements. And I'll give you a second to think. What do you think it is? Hip internal rotation, hip external rotation, or hip extension? And then what I also want to ask you is it on the lead side, the trail side, or both sides? Give you a couple seconds to think about. All right. The answer is hip internal rotation on your lead side. So specifically right here on impact and follow through, what I've seen is that because we don't do this in normal day activity, the hip internal rotation gets limited. It can vary from 10 degrees, 15 degrees, 20 degrees, 25 degrees. In an ideal world, we're at 35 to 45 for golfers. The better golfers, the ones that have that nice fluid golf swing and good hip clearance and good ball striking and distance, their hip internal rotation is up to about 35, 45 degrees. So if there's nothing else you take away from this free workshop presentation, that the hip has to move internally. Most people can improve their flexibility. There are some medical reasonings for not being able to. Please consult any medical professional to make sure that you're doing it right. If you want to go on a stretching program to improve your hip internal rotation, you know that it can be done safely and your body can accept it. So the number one tightness with the hip internal rotation, I give you 3 factors of the swing characteristics, TPI calls them, that directly relate to hip internal rotation tightness, also hip extension tightness, and external rotation tightness. So the first one is called early extension. Your hips are coming towards the ball. Typically, what we see with golfers, their head goes up. When you are if you take a look at this picture, you see the hips aren't twisting at all. If you can't turn into your left hip and you can't internally rotate 35 to 45 degrees, our tendency will be to go up, stand up, to get enough clearance for your hands, excuse me, to get back to the ball. So hip internal rotation is big, and then you can take a look at how his hips are flexed, so that could be tightness of the hip extenders as well, or extension as well. This is a slide. Again, the same kind of pattern, that if you can't twist into your left hip, or a compensation would be to lean into it in order to get that power in the club back down to the ball. And you can see the knee bent, so that could be tightness of the hip extension. And then the other one would be if you can't twist into, this is called hanging back. If you can't twist into your left hip, you stop your entire body and you, what we call hang back, and we try to lean back away so we can get the club shut, closed off, so you can make good contact. People can play with all three of these, and I've seen some high-level golfers play with them. A couple big factors. Injuries are a big number one. So with this pattern, lower back on the right side. With this pattern, typically lower back on the right. This one, again, lower back, but wrists are into it, and sometimes knee. So the number one tightness issue is the hip internal rotation. That has to be worked on to get to the levels that if your body allows. And if you have any of these three movement patterns, if you're losing distance, there's a good chance that you're early extending or sliding or hanging back. If you are slicing or pull hooks, those all relate to these three movement patterns. And then higher scores are a combination of both of these. If you're hitting behind the ball, it's most likely you're doing this one. If you're catching it too thin, it's this one or this one. So a lot of different factors, depends on you and your body and what your hips are allowed to do. So what you have to do is get the hips moving. Hips are the most foundational movements of the golf swing. First, identify. Do you have a limitation? Is it a tightness? Is it a mobility issue? Then, if you consult your medical professional, correct it. Manual stretching is huge. Getting in there, stretching that joint, getting the muscles to be looser, and follow up with exercises to reinforce that movement pattern. Then you have to implement into a golf swing adjustments. Basically, your body has been swinging the golf club one way. Once you hit the reset button on the body, then you can work on getting what I call movement pattern strength for golf, getting that brain-body connection and the memory, so you can reproduce these hip turns in there so you hit the ball better, more consistent, more power output, better scores. So if you have any questions regarding this free workshop, please let me know. You can email me at dulacpt@gmail.com. All I ask is put in the subject, hey, question about the hips, and then I'll be able to respond to that. Or please feel free to call or text. Longer questions, email or call. Short questions, text is great. I can explain it. Or I might just say, let's hop on a quick call to discuss. So if you have any questions behind this, please let me know. But if I leave one thing with you, get those hips moving. It will improve your golf swing. So have a great upcoming season and enjoy this nice weather that we're having in Pittsburgh at this time. It's January 25th, and we have a lot of snow. So golf season seems pretty far away. So it's a great time to fix that body. Thanks.